The Scottish National Party launches its election manifesto with a pledge to make Scotland stronger at Westminster. Party leader Nicola Sturgeon also said she would represent the interests of voters across Britain if her party ends up in a position of power.
We will exercise that influence responsibly and constructively, and we will always seek to exercise it in the interests of people not just in Scotland but across the whole of the UK.
We'll be getting the latest from Edinburgh and reaction in England. Also this lunchtime, 3 more migrants die as they try to reach Europe, killed as their boat crashes onto rocks off the coast of Rhodes. EU foreign ministers meet to discuss the recent deaths of hundreds of migrants in the Mediterranean, many of whom drowned locked below deck. Police accused of changing their stories tell the Hillsborough inquest they were advised by lawyers that it was all right to do so. Stop the violence. The Zulu King calls for calm after hundreds of people are arrested and 7 killed in South Africa.
And on Reporting Scotland, we'll have more details on Nicola Sturgeon's launch of the SNP's General Election Manifesto. And Police Scotland unveil a national task force to tackle child sex abuse.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon has launched her party's election manifesto with a pledge to make Scotland stronger at Westminster. She said she would represent the interests of voters across Britain if her party ends up in a position of power after the 7th of May. Current polling suggests no one party will win an overall majority and that the Scottish Nationalists could be the UK's 3rd largest party. David Cameron says the rise in support for the SNP in Scotland means the stakes in the election have just got much, much higher and that the Nationalists posed clear and present dangers to Britain. From Edinburgh, Laura Bicker reports.
Politics in Scotland these days is like an adrenaline sport. A party which had only 6 MPs is now grappling for a foothold in power. Polls suggest they could reach for up to 50 seats, and that's why the pitch had to be just right. For the SNP leader, it's not just about appealing to voters in Scotland.
To everyone who, like me, wants this election to herald the real and positive change that will make life better for ordinary people across these islands, I hold out a hand of friendship.
Miss Sturgeon is in favour of modest spending increases, opposing the cuts proposed by the 2 main parties.
The manifesto we published today sets out our priorities for progressive change. It is a manifesto above all else to end austerity. That will be our #1 priority.
And then there was what is a red line for this party: no new nuclear weapons.
We will seek to build an alliance in the House of Commons against the renewal of Trident, and we will vote for the £100 billion that would be saved to be invested instead in education, better childcare and the National Health Service. That's how we will spend that money.
Nicola Sturgeon has come under pressure to rule out another independence referendum.
The SNP will always support independence. But this election...
The wry smile said it all. Even the word independence excites these supporters. But Miss Sturgeon has to appeal to those who believe that question is settled.
But this election is not about independence. It is about making Scotland stronger.
By raising issues such as putting more money into the NHS, raising the minimum wage and scrapping Trident, this manifesto is an offer to Labour, not for a formal coalition but for a vote-by-vote deal. The question is, if Ed Miliband needs this offer, will he take it? Nicola Sturgeon has said her party has a mountain to climb before holding any balance of power. By putting aside the question of independence for later and standing on an anti-austerity platform, she'll hope that the summit is somewhere in sight. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Well, Christian Fraser has been looking over the detail of the SNP manifesto and he is at the election hub for us now. Christian.
Thank you. We'll start by showing you how the landscape is changing in Scotland, starting with a look at the vote in 2010. You can see that Labour took a 42% share of the vote. That equated to 41 of the 59 seats. SNP took just 6. But look how it's changed. This is the latest YouGov poll, 8th and 9th of April, and now you have the SNP 24 points in the lead, and according to some of the forecasts we've seen, that would give them well over 40 seats. So the map, as it looked in 2010, would be changing predominantly yellow. Very different look, according to the forecast we're getting at the moment. How would that affect things in Westminster? Well, there are lots of groups forecasting seats at the moment. This is electionforecast.co.uk, and remember, there is a margin of error. And you can do an awful lot with these figures, but I'm going to make it very simple for you. We'll drop Labour in there, and we'll put the SNP on top. And with the support of the other left-leaning parties, that would trump anything that the Conservatives could pull together. That would enable them to vote down a Queen's speech. But remember, if that was going to happen, then maybe the Liberal Democrats would come across to the Labour side. And again, with the left-leaning parties, among the others, that would again keep the Conservatives out of power. So you could get a Labour minority government that looked like that, in which case the SNP's power would be diminished. They wouldn't have the same leverage. Well, let's have a look at the policies, where they agree and where they might not disagree. We're going to start with the principal theme of the economy. This is what Labour have at the moment, cutting the deficit every year, balancing the books by the next Parliament. Today, anti-austerity from the SNP, modest spending increases of 0.5%, which would account to a massive £140 billion extra of investment. Where might they agree? Well, on the NHS, of course, more funding for the NHS from Labour. They would scrap the bedroom tax, and they would reintroduce the 50p top rate of income tax for high earners. The SNP want a huge increase in NHS spending, £9.5 billion above inflation, with an extra £2 billion for Scotland. They too would want to scrap the bedroom tax, and despite wanting fiscal autonomy and control over all taxes levied in Scotland, they would impose a 50p tax rate for the rest of the UK, a mansion tax and a tax on bankers' bonuses. And looking at the final one, no prizes for this one. Labour, of course, supporting the renewal of Trident, at least three of the 4 nuclear submarines. For the SNP, it is a red line. But remember, if it came to a vote on Trident, then the Conservatives would vote with Labour. So this becomes immaterial.
Christian Fraser, thank you very much. Well, our assistant political editor Norman Smith is in Edinburgh. Nicola Sturgeon addressing 2 distinct audiences separated by a border.
Yeah, Simon, welcome to this soaring venue where the SNP launched their manifesto, a metaphor for their soaring political ambitions, because they seek now not just to shape who forms the next government, but to shape the policies that government pursues, not just here in Scotland, but throughout the rest of the UK. And 2 words really define today: fear and friendship. David Cameron's view that voters outside of Scotland should fear a Labour government propped up by the SNP, imposing SNP policies on the rest of the UK, which people had not voted for. Nicola Sturgeon's riposte: I offer the hand of friendship, that SNP policies such as an end to austerity, more money for the NHS and childcare, those are popular policies, she believes, throughout the UK. Indeed, she said she'd received messages and letters of support from voters in England. She also tried to reach over the heads of the Labour leadership, who've rejected talk of a coalition and rebuffed pleas for some sort of formal deal, saying that the SNP could make Labour bolder and better. But she was asked afterwards, why are the English scared of you? And that is the key question. Do people believe she offers a hand of friendship, or do they fear she wants to cause chaos and tension at Westminster in pursuit of her broader ambition of Scottish independence?
Well, we're going to be hearing from voters in England later in the programme, but Norman, for now, thank you very much. Get more on the general election. The SNP have launched their manifesto, which was immediately dismissed by the party's opponents. Here's some of the day's reaction.
The SNP would have a set of ransom demands. No investment in Britain's defence industries unless you get rid of Trident. No HS2 unless it starts in Scotland. This has only been happening over a period of 24 hours, and we've already had those chilling interventions that would fundamentally affect people's jobs and livelihoods in our country.
The prospectus is outlined by the SNP today simply relies on borrowing more. They want to take us back to the model that failed in 2008. They want us to go back to the economy that crashed and leave future generations to pick up the tab. Every child in Scotland at the moment will be paying £305 a year to pay back the debts that Nicola Sturgeon is wanting to sign them up for today.
Nicola Sturgeon's trying to drop the word autonomy, an odd thing for a nationalist politician to do. She's now calling it full fiscal responsibility. It's a little bit like Ian Duncan Smith trying to rename zero-hour contracts. This is a bad deal for Scotland, and we'll continue to make the case for why what you need is to pool and share resources across the whole of the United Kingdom.
Well, the SNP leader, Nicola Sturgeon, said she didn't think the English were scared of her. Far from it, she said. Her inbox was full of inquiries from people outside Scotland asking how they could vote for the SNP. Our correspondent Fiona Trott has been to Newcastle to gauge the public reaction there to the SNP Manifesto.
Newcastle upon Tyne, a traditional Labour seat and just 60 miles from the Scottish borders. The SNP says it will look after the interests of cities like this, but are voters here convinced? Helen Stevenson and Kate Pargerton are economics students at Newcastle University. They pay tuition fees of £9,000 a year.
I think overall, Scottish MPs would try to build bridges over the border with MPs in the north of England, but most of their emphasis is still going to be on Scotland and looking out for their interests.
Yeah, I feel the same, maybe a bit sceptical about it. If they could offer us a deal on tuition fees, that would be good, but who knows whether it would actually happen or not.
When you stop and talk to shoppers here, most of them tell you there is a north-south divide. Nicola Sturgeon's plans to end austerity are welcome, but politicians have a lot of work to do to gain their trust.
I wouldn't disagree with what she's got to say. However, I think the general worry with people in England is that they do want, ultimately, to be a separate country.
But they're talking about an end to austerity.
Yes, hallelujah to that. Of course, yes. Don't we all?
They should be doing what they do when they get paid for nothing and they're not pulling the weight.
Maybe they've got a better handle on issues up here in Newcastle, though, because they're not that far away.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I've never met any nationalist that I could possibly agree with.
Scotland may not be a million miles away, but it appears as though voters here are not convinced by what the SNP is offering today. They're still more concerned about strengthening their ties with their own politicians in Westminster than with their neighbours over the border. Fiona Trott, BBC News, Newcastle.
Sinn Féin has launched its manifesto calling for an extra £1.5 billion spending power for Northern Ireland in negotiations with an incoming British government. Stormont's Deputy First Minister, Martin McGuinness, said the party would resist further austerity and cuts to welfare. Northern Ireland political editor Mark Davenport reports.
Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness's manifesto slogan is equality, not austerity. Sinn Féin has resisted changes to Northern Ireland's welfare system and says it wants an extra £1.5 billion restored to the Northern Ireland budget.
Unionism is comfortable with Tory cuts. That's what their politics are. People would say, is it one side facing the other? But we have policies. Our policies are against austerity. Our policies are for equality.
Sinn Féin wants the Stormont devolved government to have full control over local income tax. In the event of a referendum on European Union membership, it says Northern Ireland should have its own separate binding vote. Sinn Féin portrays its campaign as a fight against Tory cuts and makes no secret of the fact that it would prefer a Labour-led government. But it's adamant any Sinn Féin MPs returned won't take their seats at Westminster, and scornful of those who claim the Northern Ireland parties could play a key role in deciding who the future Prime Minister might be.
It is my view that the next government in Britain will come from a configuration of the Conservative Party, the Liberal Democrats, the Labour Party and the Scottish National Party. That's where the next government will come from, and those parties here that propagate the notion that they will be in a position of influence are basically misleading the electorate.
Like the Scottish National Party, Sinn Féin's goal is to break up the UK as it exists. Unlike the SNP, it doesn't see taking its seats and voting at Westminster as the way to pursue its aim. Mark Davenport, BBC News, County Tyrone.
You're watching the BBC News at 1. It's coming up to 1:30.
The headlines on Reporting Scotland this Monday lunchtime. Nicola Sturgeon says she holds out a hand of friendship to the rest of the UK as she outlines her party's election manifesto. A national task force is created to tackle child abuse. And we speak to swimming champion Ross Murdoch, who for a change is on the water, not in it. Good afternoon. The SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon has launched her party's manifesto for the general election, saying voters in other parts of the UK have nothing to fear from the party. Our political editor Brian Taylor reports.
The entry was more rock concert than political launch, but Nicola Sturgeon urged a cool focus on the party's prospects. This election, she said, was not a mandate for independence or even for a referendum. It was about Scottish interests.
We will stand up for Scotland's interests, and we will always fight your corner. Our job is to serve you, and we will do it at Westminster just as we do in the Scottish Parliament, to the very best of our ability. That is my promise to Scotland.
Polls suggest the SNP could hold the balance of power at Westminster. Given that, the manifesto offers policies for the entire UK, such as no upgrade for Trident, and for England alone, such as halting NHS privatisation south of the border.
If the SNP emerges from this election in a position of influence, we will exercise that influence responsibly and constructively, and we will always seek to exercise it in the interests of people not just in Scotland but across the whole of the UK.
Nicola Sturgeon offered to work with Labour, and the manifesto matches several key Labour pledges, such as a 50p top tax rate and a mansion tax on the most expensive properties.
Well, let's go to Brian Taylor now. Brian, what's reaction been to that?
Jackie, you can perhaps see the set there being demolished behind me for this launch of the Edinburgh International Climbing Arena, a launch in which Nicola Sturgeon emphasised these elections were not about a mandate for independence or even a referendum. Indeed, she said she wasn't planning a referendum. There'd have to be a material change. Nonetheless, Labour have said that she has not ruled out a second referendum. They say that is a clash with the position adopted during the referendum itself, when they say the SNP was saying it was a decision for a generation. As for the Liberal Democrats, they say the SNP manifesto launched here is a short-term thinking, an example of short-term thinking leading, say the Lib Dems, to long-term debt. As for the Conservatives, they say it is a false prospectus of the SNP to say that they can remove austerity, because they say the SNP's proposals ultimately involve Scotland taking charge of tax and spending. That's full fiscal autonomy, which the Tories say would be ruinous.
Thank you very much, Brian. And BBC Scotland has announced the second of two televised Scottish leaders' debates, this one on the 3rd of May in Edinburgh, chaired by Glenn Campbell. It'll involve the leaders of Scotland's political parties, and if you'd like the opportunity to be part of the audience, details of how to apply can be found on our BBC Scotland News website. A national task force set up to tackle child abuse has been unveiled. It will be based at a unit in Livingston. It was set up in response to recent scandals. Joanne Macaulay is there for us this lunchtime.
Well, this office here in Livingston is now the base for the Child Abuse Investigations Unit, and there'll be specially trained officers across the country. But this base here will provide coordination and support. Well, with me is the Assistant Chief Constable of Police Scotland, Malcolm Graham. Why is there a need for this unit to be set up?
Well, we've recognised that in the past child abuse has not been dealt with by society, going back over tens and hundreds of years in the way that we would expect it to be today. So building on all of that feedback and learning, we've decided that the creation of a national unit with the opportunity that Police Scotland brings is the best way of coordinating a consistent and high standard, not only of how we engage, interact with victims of this horrific crime, but also in terms of the nature of the investigations that we are able to conduct. We need to recognise that child abuse in the different forms that it takes place is always changing as well. New technologies, it's an increasingly global world, and therefore, unfortunately, children are increasingly targeted through the internet, and we need to develop new approaches to keep up to speed with that. Since the creation of Police Scotland, we've recognised that one of the best ways of doing that is to have a national focus supporting local policing units, and that's what the National Child Abuse Unit is all about.
To what extent have the recent high-profile sex scandals led to more historical child abuse allegations being brought forward?
Any awareness about child abuse leads to an increase in reporting, and that's a good thing. I would encourage anyone who's been a victim of abuse, whenever it happened, to come forward and report it to the police. You will be taken seriously and believed, and we'll do a full investigation into the report that you make.
Malcolm Graham, thank you very much indeed. So the unit is now fully up and running, and it's hoped that it will make a difference to all children who've been the victims of any type of abuse.
5 people have been taken to hospital following a multiple vehicle crash on the main motorway through the centre of Glasgow during this morning's rush hour. Both lanes of the M8 were closed to allow emergency vehicles to gain access to the crash site. Our reporter Katrina Renton was at the scene.
It was just after 9 o'clock this morning, at the tail end of the busy rush hour, when the crash happened. 6 cars, a small council van and a lorry were involved. Emergency services rushed to the scene and the road was closed. 2 people had to be cut free from their cars. 3 people were taken to the city's Western Infirmary, 1 to the Southern General, and a child was taken to York Hill. Fortunately, none are believed to be in a life-threatening condition.
It's now almost 2 hours since this morning's crash, and you'll be able to see that there's still a considerable police, fire and ambulance presence here after what's been a truly horrific collision.
This lunchtime, the road is now open. Katrina Renton, Reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
Meanwhile, fire crews in Glasgow are tackling a blaze at a building used as a church in the city's Govan area. The fire on Crosslone Road began shortly before 10:30 last night. At one stage, 35 firefighters were at the scene as flames shot through the roof of a single-storey building. A neighbouring 4-storey tenement was evacuated, but there are no reports of injuries. The transfer of oil between tankers has resumed in Orkney waters. The local port authority has recently been granted a new licence to carry out ship-to-ship operations in Scapa Flow. 2 transfers took place between vessels over the weekend. Environmental campaigners have raised concerns over the practice and claim that ballast water from the tankers risks introducing invasive species into local waters.